Super, good afternoon everyone. So the industry has understandably been focused on subscription video on demand over the last few years. The rise of Netflix, the emergence of Amazon, of course, the launch of a number of direct-to-consumer services from the studios and tech players like Apple. But if we take a step back and think about the money in the industry, the AVOD market, the ad-funded video sector, is approximately the same size. It's the same scale. So if we look at these two bars on this chart, illustrate the evolution of subscription funding in the industry, how much money is being generated by OTT services like Netflix, like Amazon, and all their local counterparts, and the amount of money in online video advertising. So that's both in-stream and out-stream. And although subscription video on demand has seen an acceleration over the last few years as new services launch, as existing services broaden their geographic reach, roughly speaking, at the end of this year, they'll be close to neck and neck. So subscription video on demand at $48 billion worldwide, the AVOD market in its widest sense at $40 billion. So who are the companies in this space? We've already seen some of them discussed today. So broadly, we can categorize them into a few themed groups. We've got the social networks. YouTube, obviously, but Facebook big in video, Twitter, big in video. We've got many of their partners and content suppliers in the publishers and digital studios, some of which have their own platforms and their own ad-funded video strategies on their own sites and applications. We could spend the whole presentation looking at those, but today I'm actually going to spend most of the time talking about the groups in the middle and on the right. And these are the pure play AVOD services, like Pluto TV, like Tubi, like Vudu, like IMDb TV, the device focus groups like Roku and Zumo, and the hybrid models, which combine both a subscription service with an ad-funded tier. So I'm going to start with those. I'm going to start talking about the hybrid groups. And it's Hulu, I think, provides an interesting case study because perhaps Hulu's grasped the opportunity of hybrid arguably better than anyone else in the world. So let's have a look at how Hulu has done this. So the case for advertising within a subscription. So for those of you who aren't aware, Hulu has two tiers of video on demand service. It's got a $5.99 hybrid tier that contains some advertising, and it's got an $11.99 premium tier without any advertising. So let's have a look at some of the stats around the numbers of subscribers taking Hulu's services. So Hulu last year took about 7% of the US AVOD market. By our estimates, it's the number 3 player. This year, it's likely to be in double-digit market share, and that's been driven by substantial growth in the numbers of subscribers taking its AVOD, its hybrid service. Underlying this, Hulu's subscriber base. So Hulu's had a successful time over the last few years. It's still the number 3 player in the US market in terms of the aggregate number of subscribers, behind Netflix and Amazon. But it's grown from around about 10 million customers back in 2015, all the way up to ending 2019 on around about 30 million subscribers. But there's been an interesting change in Hulu's strategy over the last few years. In the early part of that, growth was driven by this orange segment. Those are the ad-free, the premium subscribers. So the model was shifting much more towards a pure play subscription model. But in mid-2018, that began to change. And at that point, the bulk of growth shifted over towards the hybrid subscribers. And despite the fact that Hulu had seen pretty impressive growth through 2018, in 2019, it dropped the price for its basic tier from $7.99 a month to $5.99. So despite the fact it had a great record year for net additions, more people were taking the service, it actually dropped the price even further to the point that people are increasingly incentivized towards taking the hybrid tier. And they represent around about 70% of Hulu's subscribers today. In fact, if you go onto Hulu's website today, you're presented with two options. You've got Hulu at $5.99 per month with advertising, and you've got the virtual cable subscription. So we're not going to talk about that. That's basically your core broadcast channels plus the video on demand library. Where's the premium option? How do you get access to that? What price is it? It's down there. It's hidden away. So Hulu, on its front page of its service on its site is actively incentivizing people to sign up to the non-premium option, the $5.99 tier. Well, why? Well, I'm sure most of you will have guessed this by now. It's because it makes more money from that tier. You only push people towards that pricing plan if you can generate more money from it. And in fact, if we look at the amount of money that's generated each month from an ad-supported subscriber, they generate roughly $5 per month more than an ad-free subscriber, despite the fact that the retail price is substantially smaller. And that's because of the amount of money that's generated by the AVOD element of the business. So the question now is, well, Hulu's done this. Is the model more generalizable if we look across the wider subscription video on demand market? Could other players, could slightly more niche players, supplement their subscription income by adding a hybrid tier? So that's the question. Well, the answer is, well, maybe. So if we think about how companies can make money from AVOD, how subscription services can generate cash, there are a few fundamental determinants of how much money a particular subscriber is going to be worth. And that's going to be the amount of time they spend watching content, the ad load within that content, the CPMs, so the amount that that inventory can be sold for. So what we've got here is a chart with two things on. On the horizontal axis, we've got the number of hours watched per day by a typical subscriber. And on the vertical axis, under various CPM and ad load assumptions, how much money could be made per month from that subscriber. Unsurprisingly, the more content someone watches, the more advertising they're exposed to, the more money they're worth on a monthly basis. And you can work it out. The numbers vary depending on the assumptions you make, but imagine in the UK, your user is watching an hour on the service per day. The ad load and CPM assumptions that we've got here per month, maybe they'd be worth £3 to £4. Same if they watch 50% more, an hour and a half per day, they can be worth a little bit more, maybe £5 to £6 per month. Okay. So, as a subscription service, can you make money from this? Let's take a few examples. Let's take a few services that are charging $3.99 per month at the moment, $6.99 per month at the moment, and $9.99. And let's assume that they introduce a hybrid tier that's £2 per month cheaper. So instead of $9.99, you can get $7.99, but with adverts. Instead of $6.99, you get $4.99, but with adverts. Of course, the ability to make that more revenue generative than your subscription tier, your pure subscription tier, is determined by the amount of time that consumers spend watching content per day. And the cutoff point, again, it's going to vary on the underlying assumptions, but is about half an hour per day. So if your subscribers, on average, are watching less than half an hour per day, under a hybrid model that costs £2 per month less, you would make less money. And above that point, you would make more money, in theory. Okay, so what's realistic? Well, if we look at the market today, we can get a few benchmarks from some big players. In fact, if we look at Netflix and Hulu, average consumption per consumer, somewhere between an hour and a quarter and an hour and a half per subscriber per day. It's quite significant. It's an appreciable portion of the average consumer's viewing day. So, looks feasible. Other OTT services could do this. Maybe. Because when we think about the amount of content at the disposal of these various services, Hulu and Netflix have somewhere in the region of about 40,000 hours available. So there's a huge amount of content that people can browse through and spend time watching. So that helps support that hour and a half that consumers spend each day. Whereas a lot of the other services in the market, they have decent-sized catalogues. These are not small brands. They're not small names. Showtime, BritBox, HBO, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 hours of content. And that sounds like a lot, but if we take Showtime as an example, a big brand, averaged across a year, that 2,200 hours of content represents about 6 hours per day of consumer viewing options. Now, I don't know about you, but that suggests to me that they're unlikely to be able to support an hour and a half per day or an hour per day of viewing. They're not going to get up to Hulu or Netflix levels of consumption on a catalogue of that size. It's theoretically possible, but it's unlikely. So, what does that leave us with? Does it mean that the hybrid model just simply cannot be supported by niche service providers? So let's take this. You take a $6.99 thematic subscription video on demand service. You're successful. Your subscribers watch over an hour a week. But that only works out about 10 minutes per day. You introduce your hybrid option at $4.99 and it makes less money than your premium tier. Right? Wrong, probably, possibly. So what actually happens in these instances? So, well, the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed that in the Hulu chart earlier when, of course, it introduced the new discounted hybrid tier, subscriber growth increased. And that's, of course, the other factor that we need to bear in mind. So when we're working through this model, if we're looking at the $6.99 thematic SVOD service, the subs watch 10 minutes per day, you introduce the hybrid option at $4.99, price-sensitive potential customers take the $4.99 offer, and your advertising intolerant subscribers take the $6.99 offer. Effectively, the hybrid tier functions as a price discrimination model, providing you judge the differential right and your ad load right, etc. It allows two tiers of service to exist in parallel while limiting the cannibalization of your more valuable premium subscribers. So even if you're not driving the same levels of consumption as a Hulu, there's an opportunity to make a hybrid model work. But of course, as we've heard about today already from a number of speakers, we are entering an increasingly crowded subscription video on demand market. So it may not just be about introducing hybrid tiers to an SVOD service. It may be about pure play AVOD. And we've seen variants on this statistic presented today already, but just to reiterate it, the market is getting very crowded. This is the number of services, subscription services, taken by the average UK subscription OTT household. Back in 2015, 85% of those OTT households had just one service, typically Netflix. By Q3 2019, the majority had multiple packages or different services, so Amazon or different Now TV packages, as well as their Netflix subscription. So very crowded, and of course, the entrance of the new services this year and next year is going to make it worse. So, brings us to AVOD. Now, many of those names we introduced at the beginning of the presentation, we've seen through earlier presentations today, have invested already reasonably heavily in content. Now, some of that content may be questionable, but the catalogue sizes and the amounts of consumption that they can drive are significant. So we've simply lined up the size of the AVOD services on the right-hand side with the size of both new and emerging subscription video on-demand platforms. And players like Tubi and Vudu have catalogue sizes equivalent to Netflix and Amazon, and IMDb, Roku, and others have services that are equivalent in size to some of those big names like HBO and Showtime. So there's significant opportunity here. And that opportunity is already being capitalised on. Consumers are engaging with AVOD. In September this year, we interviewed 4,000 US consumers. 15% of them were already using one or more of those AVOD services on a monthly basis. And I think when we interview them again in January, that number will have gone up, I suspect, to the 20-25% range. The interesting thing here is they're not just the same people as subscription video on demand households. They're older, as we can see from the chart on the left. They're more likely to skew towards the 45 plus bracket, and they're lower income. So they're already beginning to feel the pinch of the multiple subscription services entering the market, and maybe they can't afford all of those. Now, that's not necessarily the best news for advertisers, because they're thinking, well, hang on, do we want to advertise to these people? But I think it is a marker for the way the industry is heading, and as more services enter the market, we're likely to see those price brackets, those income brackets shift to the right. So with that, I'm going to sum up in terms of what we've looked at today. We've seen the ad-funded video space is large. In aggregate, it is roughly the same size as the subscription video on demand market. It's not growing quite as quickly, but I think with the entrance of a number of these new AVOD players, we're likely to see an acceleration. It's not just about pure play. Hulu's demonstrated that you can fund a service through a mixture of models, although the conditions have to be right. But also the crowded subscription video on demand market means that there is an opportunity for a whole raft of these new pure play AVOD services to enter and capitalise on willingness to spend, or the lack of willingness to spend, that is likely to permeate the market over the next few years. So I hope that's been useful. Thank you very much.